The Five Nights at Freddy's movie is finally out after what feels like a millennium since its initial announcement in 2015. I was about 14 years old when this movie was first announced, and now I'm 22. So, a lot has happened in that time frame. Now, when it comes to my history with Five Nights at Freddy's, I was a pretty avid fan of the games and the YouTubers that were playing it. I followed a lot of the theories and the lore up until the release of Five Nights at Freddy's 4. And after that, I kind of just moved on with my life. I feel like at that point, the franchise had just gotten so big and so convoluted that it was hard to really keep up if you looked away for a minute. Since Five Nights at Freddy's 4, there have been so many new games. There's Sister Location, Pizzeria Simulator, Ultimate Custom Night, the Help Wanted VR experience, Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach, not to mention all of the books that have been released. There's over a dozen of them. This franchise has gotten a lot bigger since its heyday in regards to quantity. But thankfully, I didn't need to know every single detail about every single game in order to understand this movie. Granted, this is the first of a supposed trilogy, so there might be a lot down the pipeline. But does this movie stand on its own as a good film? Yeah, I'd say so. We follow Mike, played by Josh Hutcherson, and he's assigned to be the nighttime security guard at a local animatronic-filled pizzeria, similar in vein to something like Showbiz or Chuck E. Cheese. He's also got a little sister that he is the guardian of, fighting for custody of her with his aunt. As the week goes on, a lot more crazy, mysterious things start to happen in the restaurant, and he has to uncover what exactly happened at Freddy's that led it to close down all those years ago. Mike is played by Josh Hutcherson, who I personally know from Bridge to Terabithia and The Hunger Games. I know he's not really in a lot of movies, but I thought it was really cool to see him in this role, and I was pretty surprised to see him being casted in this movie. But for what he was assigned, I think he did a really great job. He also has a lot of grief, which is something that's not really touched on in the trailers, but they really explore this throughout the movie, and I think they did a really good job doing so. Matthew Lillard is also in this movie, albeit pretty briefly, but his parts were great. Matthew Lillard is great in practically everything that he's in. Scream, Scooby-Doo, Twin Peaks. The pizzeria itself, while not identical to the game, serves as a really great set piece. It has the perfect look of a rundown 80s Chuck E. Cheese style restaurant. As for the animatronics, they seriously look like they came straight out of the games. It's honestly uncanny how amazing they look. So huge shout out to those at the Jim Henson Creature Shop for making this happen and making them look as great as they do. I figured that Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy would look great regardless, but the fact that they look this good is incredible. I am simply just blown away. There were also a couple of cameos, and if you're a fan of YouTubers that have made videos on Five Nights at Freddy's, I'm sure you'll get some enjoyment out of those. I audibly sighed at one of them specifically. I'm not going to get into which one, but you'll know when you see it. The entire movie, honestly, just looks great. Tammi, the director of this movie, did a fantastic job. I'm not really too familiar with her work outside of this. I know she's directed a couple of indie horror movies, and I will definitely be checking those out. But I gotta say, this looks like she's been doing this for a long time. Like, the way this looks, it just looks great. It doesn't look like a first-timer or someone who's only made, like, a few smaller things. Like, this is a really good-looking movie. Now, in regard to the lore that's present in this movie, there's a lot of it. I'm not sure if I could say you'll be necessarily lost if you haven't played the games or anything like that. There are things that are mentioned in like the phone guy calls and the little mini games that you play in those games, but it's never really the forefront of the games. So when you're transitioning it to a movie, you do kind of have to knock in those elements a lot more because it'll help make the narrative a lot less simple. So yes, this movie is very lore heavy. They give you a lot of information, and I could see some people getting a little lost if they're not too familiar with everything going on. But as someone who did have a basic understanding of the fact that there were kids that were kidnapped and then stuffed into animatronic suits, I think playing the games definitely helped me to an extent, but it's definitely not required because I know there are plenty of people who are going to see this movie and have never played the games. I'm sure there are going to be people going into this movie expecting like a crazy slasher with a bunch of Chuck E. Cheese knockoff characters, but that's just not the case here. Sure, there's plenty of things like jump scares and all sorts of stuff, but even that isn't as present in this movie. There's a lot less than I honestly expected there to be, and I'm not even mad at that, though. This could have easily been just jump scare after jump scare after jump scare and been a lot worse as a result. But I'm honestly kind of grateful that they went a lot more into the lore aspects of the franchise and gave a lot more life to these characters. I think it honestly helped the movie in the long run. The director and the producers have said that they made this for the fans, and it shows. This is a great movie for fans of Five Nights at Freddy's. There's also been this debate about the rating of the movie. The movie's rated PG-13, and a lot of people were upset by that. They wanted an R-rated movie. I'm not sure why people were really expecting this to be as violent as they really wanted it to be. Not to mention, this franchise is really popular with young kids. I mean, granted, I was about 14 years old when the first games were coming out. I'm sure a lot of people my age, or a little older, a little younger, are upset that it wasn't as violent for some reason. They probably feel, oh, I'm an adult now. I want my R-rated slasher horror movies. But that's not what we got here, and I'm not even mad at that. I never once expected this movie to be rated R. I figured right out the floodgates, it's going to be PG-13. They're not gonna lean into it too much. They did have some pretty creative kills, though. Like, I'll give it that. Like, they did it in ways that I thought were clever enough. And sure, they might have been a little silly, but this is a movie about a bunch of animatronic characters in a pizzeria. And a lot of the stuff in the games is led up to interpretation. There's not really any answers that are flat out said to you. Now, I'm not going to get into spoilers per se for the movie with certain things that happen and that are revealed. But what I will say is that there are some elements of the ending that I wish they would have just saved for a future movie. I'm kind of disappointed that they jumped right into it. I feel like they could have maybe built up to something like this. But for what it's worth, I think they did a good job with what they did. Overall, I actually had a really good time with Five Nights at Freddy's. I know a lot of people are shitting on this movie, saying it's awful and a mess, but honestly, I understood a good amount of it. Maybe that's because I've played some of the games and understand a bit of the lore, but even if I didn't, I feel like I would have still had a good time with this. I'm going to give Five Nights at Freddy's 3.5 stars. I think if you're a fan of the Five Nights at Freddy's games, I highly recommend you go see this in a theater. I know it's on Peacock as well, but I think you'll definitely have a better experience if you watch it in a theater. Thank you so much for watching my review on the Five Nights at Freddy's movie. I'm planning on possibly doing a spoiler review / discussion video, whether that be by myself or with a friend. I'm still debating that, but if it does happen, look forward to that. It'll be on the end card. If you haven't already, be sure to check out my reviews on Totally Killer and Taylor Swift The Eras Tour. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you all in the next one. Take it easy. Peace.